Dead of the Night killed Black Ops 4 Zombies, and while many people love to argue that this first DLC is a bad zombies experience due to the perceived overindulgence of puzzles, parts, and impracticality, the real reason for the disdain isn't as clear as it seems. After Zombies Chronicles and the peak moment it created for the Call of Duty franchise, there had been a volatile trend of excitement that ended up exploding in Treyarch's face on October 12th, 2018. With the catastrophic launch of 4 fully loaded maps and the horrendous Black Ops Pass, the community was feeling overwhelmed and fatigued. This led to the negative reception of Dead of the Night, which in many ways was a representative for what appeared to be one of the most disastrous timelines the zombies community had ever seen. But how bad were things really? As inside of the map we had an overpowered wonder weapon, gorgeous spaces to traverse, and tons of hidden secrets to sift through. It's kind of curious why fans were so turned off by DLC 1 initially, and even still to this day, there are many who are just vehemently against it.
The only mercy I need is uninstalling this video game from my console right now.
I need alcohol in my system right now.
And while Dead of the Night may have been the final nail in the coffin for Black Ops 4 as a live service, when looking behind the curtain over a half-decade later, there is really only one question we should all be asking ourselves. Does any of this so-called failure have anything to do with the map itself?
Major handle an angry wolf to show him who's top dog.
Someone thinks this is funny, but it sure as shit ain't me.
You can't quit me, Godfrey. I own you now.
The first DLC offering for any game is one of the most important pieces to get right when putting together this live service puzzle. Just take a second to think back to Black Ops 1 with Ascension, Black Ops 2 with Die Rise, or Black Ops 3 with Dreisendracht. I mean, hell, we could even talk about Black Ops Cold War with Firebase Z. Each one of these releases helped to build off or continue what the launch of that particular title had established, which was either an amazing precedent or an absolutely horrendous one. Ascension launched after Keynote and helped push the mode forward, bringing about the first main quest, 2 new perks, and a new special enemy, those bastard monkeys. Die Rise, which came out after Transit, is known for the Sliquifier wonder weapon, interesting main quest, and experimental elements of verticality. And even though at the time, both Transit and Die Rise were not received particularly well, and they are now notoriously memed on by the community, this kicked Black Ops 2 Zombies development into high gear. And by the end of the game's lifecycle, developers had revitalized the game by adding in 3 powerhouse maps, Buried, Mob of the Dead, and Origins, with Mob of the Dead and Origins becoming cult classics and map blueprints for many years down the line. Dreisendracht released after Shadows of Evil and blew people's minds with its amazing storytelling, iconic bow and arrow wonder weapons, and adding in Treyarch's first take at a climactic boss fight, which dramatically shifted the mode forever as we know it. These examples show just how DLC 1 can really make or break a game's lifecycle, and if executed poorly, the momentum can decrease drastically from the release point of the game, which means that devs end up spending valuable time putting out fires rather than building off of their successes. And in the field of games that are a live service, every second counts. While the fans feed into this equation most definitely, it's up to the devs to course correct based on fan feedback, and with a ship as large as Call of Duty, let's just say it's difficult to steer things in the right direction with the clock ticking in the back of the devs' minds. And since Black Ops 4 started off with 4 zombies experiences, which were all broken for one reason or another, getting this next DLC right was imperative for Treyarch's success in the long run. And not just in terms of delivering a high-quality product, but in earning back the player's trust and bringing about optimization and stability in the game as a whole. And with the failed launch of the game and the entirety of Black Ops 4 being leaked by a disgruntled QA tester, it seemed that Treyarch couldn't catch a break and needed all of the luck that they could get. But little did Treyarch know that things were only going to go from bad to worse, as everything that the developers had been preparing for and working toward leaked early on PlayStation servers down in Australia.
Thanks, Australia.
Gameplay, trophies, wonder weapons, key art, anything and everything revealed about this brand new map Treyarch had been working on, and the reception from this leak was about as poor as you could possibly imagine. Fans were up in arms over the fact that yet again, the Aether story had to share the spotlight with this strange, foreign, and unknown Chaos storyline. And not only did Treyarch pull focus away from Aether, but they used the celebrity cast framework on this new Chaos map. This felt like a punch in the gut, as some of the most iconic maps in COD Zombies history have used this format, and they have always set a precedent of being some of Treyarch's best and most prestigious work. This also cleared up any confusion regarding whether or not we would be seeing another Ether Zombies map in the near future, as Treyarch clearly wanted to explore the Chaos storyline first. This ended up, of course, being confirmed by the release of Alpha Omega in July of 2019, 9 months after the launch of the main game. But despite all of the drama surrounding the leaks, what was really perplexing about this entire situation is that Treyarch had done virtually no promotion or advertisement of this content drop whatsoever. It just appeared randomly in the dead of the night.
Wait a minute!
And even though the leaked information appeared to be pointing to a somewhat drab experience from the outside looking in, it wasn't until the Operation Absolute Zero livestream where fans could finally get a peek behind the curtain.
So obviously on launch we released with 3 maps that we're incredibly proud of. We had a bit of a bumpy start as well, and that's something that the team has been plowing all our effort and energy into, and so that now allows us to then move our focus to other features and other things that we're developing.
Let's start with daily callings.
They'll come out, keep you engaged, and kind of give you missions to kind of go on, and then obviously have rewards when they're completed. And this is kind of, you know, stage 1 of a couple of stages of rolling out those features as well.
Additionally, we've got the Black Ops Authenticity Stamp.
When you finish your match, you'll get given a passcode or phrase. You can go to callofduty.com, BOAS I think it is. You go in there, put the code in, put your gamer tag in, and it'll give you a record to say what you did and how you achieved. This is kind of stage 1 of it, and we'll actually have a stage 2 rollout where we expand it even further to talk about custom games and so forth.
And we now have daily tier skips in Zombies.
Yes, we do. Quite frankly, it was a reaction to the cry from the community, even through all the kind of chaos and stuff that we're, excuse the pun, all the stuff we're doing, we still have teams listening and taking that feedback in.
The first few minutes of the zombie segment was spent talking about how poor the launch of the game was and that they were fixing things on the back end. They were also adding in things like daily callings, the brand new challenge system inside of the menu that rewarded players with crates for the shop in Nebulium Plasma for elixirs. Treyarch also added in the Black Ops Authenticity Stamp System, or BOAS, which was a certification process for Zombies fans to prove that they had completed challenges legitimately. And then lastly, the devs added in 1 daily tier skip reward for the Battle Pass simply by playing Zombies only, which in my opinion, all of these things were great quality of life features to add. But the problem with all of these systems is that they were completely shallow and proved to be mostly worthless at this point in the game's life cycle. The contract mission and tier skip features are nice on paper, but the rewards from them underdeliver massively as the crate system did not have duplicate protection, nor were you able to save up crates to purchase DLC weapons or weapon blueprints like you can in present day. The same went for the Nebulium Plasma rewards, as the actual amount received from the rewards was only enough for 1 spin for the lowest level of elixirs. Not to mention, the amount of plasma that the player earns in game simply by playing passively is still begrudgingly slow. Now you might be thinking, this doesn't seem that bad, at least there are paths to being rewarded, and sure, I understand your point and I even agreed to a certain extent, but the main issue here is that Treyarch had implied these systems would be interconnected in new and interesting ways to create exciting, worthwhile gameplay rewards.
So we're going to provide you with customizable tools and social systems to evolve Zombies into a evergreen mode for daily, weekly, monthly, and yearly engagement.
This is kind of stage 1 of it, and we'll actually have a stage 2 rollout where we expand it even further to talk about custom games and so forth.
We're also introducing limited time created challenges that we're naming callings, which will regularly introduce new ways for you to play the game and set the stage for ongoing seasonal content and a few themed experience surprises as well along the way.
And this is kind of, you know, stage 1 of a couple of stages of rolling out those features as well.
The daily callings and contracts only primarily worked for traditional round-based zombies and were challenges like get to round 20 on Blood of the Dead, survive 10 waves without getting hit, get your specialist to level 3. And for simple challenges, these are completely fine, but these never increased in difficulty, meaning there were never challenges like complete Voyage of Despair's Easter egg 3 times on hard to receive a free weapon camo. Nothing like that ever came to fruition, even all of these years later. Not to mention, custom mutations was locked out of the contract system as players were unable to complete Easter eggs with them toggled on. This meant all of these amazing systems that were coming daily, weekly, monthly, and seasonally were all for nothing. Shortly after the BO4 reveal event, Jason Blundell held a roundtable interview for the Zombies content creators where they talked about all things Black Ops 4 Zombies, and even some creators received the prop blood vials that were attached to Jason's backside. It was during this roundtable discussion where I believe JC Backfire asked asked Blundell about the integration of all of these systems and compared it to the likes of Halo, and Jason hinted that the customization systems would be rewarding and bigger than anything we had ever seen prior. Now, inside of these retrospectives, I try my best to provide circumstantial or legitimate evidence that leads to proper conclusions, but in this case, I cannot find the video of JC Backfire specifically talking about this, or at least I believe it was him. And believe me when I say I have checked everywhere I can think of. Now, we do have record of the specific meeting being held with these content creators, but I can't find the clip of JC talking about what I am referencing. And if I ever do find it, I will update the description or the pinned comment, so please check those regularly. That being said, the implication from this conversation was that Treyarch could have created challenges which utilized the custom mutation system that could have rewarded players with wild camos, elixirs, skins, or even COD points, all backed by the Black Ops authenticity stamp system. Round 100 with Blightfathers only on 9. Speed running the main quest on Blood of the Dead with only sprinting zombies. Realistic mode Easter eggs completed before round 20. This is just some of the depth that the system could have provided, but it was all essentially worthless due to the lack of interconnectivity and depth which the community presumed it would have. But there was a reason for this, according to Chopper inside of his Black Ops 4 review. He discusses how custom mutations was actually never meant for zombies, which is why it was always so underwhelming. But rather than just scrap the idea and allow for Treyarch to focus on more stabilization features or just the maps themselves, they decided to integrate it into the zombies mode.
In, these very clearly Easter egg focused maps, it just doesn't make any sense why this feature even existed until that Reddit post. Apparently, Mutations was actually brought over from the scrapped career mode. It would have allowed you to, again, alter the game rules in those campaign missions. So, from the ground up, it was never meant for zombies from the start, which is why it feels so out of place and kind of shoehorned in Black Ops 4.
I think it's important to make a very clear distinction when it comes to the criticism of this particular portion of the video. More content doesn't necessarily mean that is a better option for the player, especially if that content isn't realized by the developers. Quality content, especially in the case of Black Ops 4, is always a better alternative for players. This wouldn't have forced Treyarch to divide their attention in such a visceral manner, pushing them on to the next map before they could even get the majority of the launch issues fixed. Building and integrating these new gameplay systems is an extremely heavy time cost, and rather than spending the time to flush them out and letting fans get creative with them on the maps that we already have, Treyarch brought us DLC 1 less than 2 months later, delivering not only a lukewarm reward system, but another chaos map that players were just not ready for. But there was one last element that was sowing discontent inside of the zombies community that was starting to unfold, which was a newfound disconnect in the communication between developers and the player base. There was almost an avoidance of the various elephants in the room regarding all of the problems that the zombies community was facing, and the community could feel this subtly nagging at the back of their mind. This wound continued to fester throughout the life cycle of Black Ops 4 Zombies, as fewer events took place for content creator interactions and those classic intriguing interviews with Jason Blundell where fans would turn every word inside out, you know the ones I'm talking about, well, they would begin to occur less frequently as well. This was in stark contrast to the height of the Black Ops 3 Zombies era. There was always a playful banter between the community and Blundell, as it kept the community guessing. It kept the YouTube content fresh for creators and was constantly breathing life into the game, as we never knew what was coming and it felt like anything was possible. And what made that dynamic so exciting was Jason was so damn good at executing his role, and when things were good in the community and with the game overall, it was very easy to slip into that stream of joviality like an old pair of worn slippers. It was so damn comfortable. But the magic of this relationship wasn't just due to Jason's ability to communicate effectively, there was also a decade of storytelling to account for. Richtofen, Dempsey, Takio, and Nikolai, heroes we grew alongside of, well, their story hadn't quite yet finished, and there was still an entire season to go. And unfortunately, I don't think Treyarch had quite realized how important each ingredient was inside of this Call of Duty Zombies cocktail that we had been sipping on for all of these years. And when they started pushing chaos to the forefront of the Zombies offering, they took those comfy slippers away from the community and placed them in the goodwill bag. Now, this doesn't discount the passion that the developers had for the chaos storyline, as as you can see their eyes light up as they talked about Dead of the Night. But at the end of the day, that playful relationship which was built naturally between Treyarch and the community regarding the Ether storyline, that had not yet been earned in respect to Chaos. And although Treyarch is the one in charge of their particular Call of Duty title, the game is ultimately for the fans. And from the outside looking in, it really felt like they forgot about that dynamic for the first time in Zombies history.
This is another chapter in our Chaos story, but this one is a prequel. We've got a map that is a character in of itself. We're in this lovely, huge, great, stately home, which is like all the places we like going to. It's nice to have something nice and then do something really nasty to it.
All our characters, and I don't know if you're picking up on a trend here, we like to do broken characters.
Yep.
We put on a portrayal of some sort of semblance of sanity, but deep inside are broken. We don't know where we get our inspiration
from. No, we have no idea.
But combine that with the game design, our team did a wonderful job of not only spatially realizing it, but also the kind of quests and how things kind of play together. So that's why we have so much fun doing our celebrity maps, is that we get to really kind of mix everything up and put it all in at the same time.
And, you know, like everything else we do, it's always fun to have kind of myth and science and technology kind of clashing, because those two things kind of don't really fit together that well.
Sure. It's got this kind of wonderful kind of architectural style. And something that we do most times really is kind of play with the architecture and what does the environment say to you, and what mood does that place you in. Having this kind of eccentric inventor, explorer, socialite kind of guy with all his friends coming to the house, the environment kind of tells you a story of this character. Even though at the very beginning you see that bad things are happening.
Looking back at these clips now, it is clear how much love Jason, Craig, and the other developers had put into this map. Almost like a childhood dream of theirs had come to life. A ravaged estate in the hills of the United Kingdom, a top-tier celebrity cast from the world's most renowned television programs, put together by a team of impassioned developers who want nothing more than to leave their mark on the world with their artistic visions. And they most certainly succeeded. But it still stung, and dare I say was even confusing, that Treyarch was headed down this path. And even though the showcase clearly laid out Treyarch's intentions with Chaos, fans were clueless to the idea of how engaging and full of secrets Dead of the Night was going to be. A level of depth which turned out to be quite controversial at the time of its launch and continues to sow division in the community to this very day.
James Dixon. Wife beaten the clock. He got what he deserved.
If we take a look at the library of Zombies maps that Treyarch has created over the last decade plus, the design of the map, or its artistic vision if you will, has always been one of the most important elements for Zombies, and Dead of the Night is no exception to this. Despite all the hullabaloo, this map is held in the mansion of Alistair Rhodes in the English countryside and has turned out to be hands down one of the most iconic locations that we have seen to date. Tall, open ceilings, marbled floors, extravagant bedrooms, dining halls, libraries, and wine cellars, and that's just on the inside. There are also magnificent outdoor areas such as the garden, greenhouse, cemetery, and forest, all packed with secrets. Just look at the level of detail that Treyarch went to when designing this map. A telescope pointing up at the night sky, the master bedroom with taxidermied animals as rugs on the floors and trophies on the wall. This all helps to emphasize Alistair's wealth, as there is even a mausoleum, which is a very common structure to have in not just England, but is a tradition for exceptionally wealthy families. Treyarch went to such great lengths to ensure that all details for this map were spectacular. This was also true even for the lore inside of the Chaos storyline regarding Alistair as a great explorer, as the developers placed a missing piece of what appears to be the Rosetta Stone inside of the greenhouse laboratory. And while it's true that somebody could look at the COD Zombies mode as a simple PvE zombie shooter, it really is much, much more than that. Because without an incredible foundation to establish your world, the gameplay mechanics simply would become arbitrary and they wouldn't hold any value to the player. So what do I mean by that? Well, inside of Der Eisendrache, the player is standing inside of a great castle, utilizing the setting in order to craft and build things. The Wolf Bow is a great example of using the paintings from the time period to tell a story of the Wolf King. There is an amazing yet small subplot about a king who wasn't given a proper burial, and the player is able to spawn in his ghastly hound in order to not just put the king to rest, but to build a wonder weapon alongside it. The same thing can be said about Arthur inside of Buried, finding him imprisoned in an old western town, releasing him and utilizing him to open up areas to reward the player by filling him up with candy and booze. These small details go such a long way inside of the zombies mode as they bring such depth and purpose to what would otherwise be just another meaningless mechanic. And Dead of the Night takes these concepts and runs wild with them. The vampires, the werewolves, the silver bullets, the hidden rooms, and a steak knife. Each one of these elements is cloaked with that 1930s whodunit vibe mixed with the Celtic mythology and Irish and English folklore, which brings to fruition an amazing enemy design and Easter egg steps that lead us to the shadow werewolf at the end of the main quest. But before we dive into the actual quest and gameplay mechanics in greater detail, let's talk about what the hell is going on inside of Dead of the Night in terms of its narrative. Dead of the Night is set up to be a prequel map to Voyage of Despair, and believe it or not, the status as a prequel was highly contentious inside of the community at the time. And while this was likely out of Treyarch's control due to the scheduling of high-profile actors, it just added on to the pile of confusion. Fans started to believe that the story was intentionally set up to be told out of order, similar to how the Ether story had been told over the years. And while some chalked it up to Treyarch just being Treyarch, others were certain that the studio was washed up and that they were losing their streak of innovation inside of the zombies mode as a whole. But even though some fans were pissed, it was still a good call to bring this map to the forefront as it cleared up a lot of questions people had about how things really began with the Chaos storyline, since the introductory maps placed us in a bit of an awkward place in the Chaos timeline. So then, how does Dead of the Night all unfold? In previous retrospectives, we discussed Alistair's relationship with the Order, a cult who is after the secret knowledge hidden around the world by the Nine. Definitely check out these videos popping up on your screen here if you want to know more about that. And after a long game of cat and mouse, the Order was finally able to track Alistair down and get their hands on him by killing the butler Godfrey, resurrecting him from the dead using the Staff of Ra, and having him do their bidding. Godfrey then poses as Alistair and sets up a party at Rhodes Manor so that the Order can force or jumpstart this trial into action by luring and trapping the guests in the estate. Eventually, Alistair was knocked out by Godfrey, tied up in the wine cellar, while the attendees for the party began to arrive. Music, drinks, dinner, the works, everything you could imagine at a lavish party was there, but there was one thing that wasn't on the menu, as shortly after the guests arrived, the trial began, turning everyone inside of the mansion into a zombie, as well as activated the Prima Materia, which brought about Nosferatus and werewolves, since Alistair had actually purchased and built his manor on top of an ancient druid burial site. It all just links up so perfectly in a nice, neat little package. But what most people don't know is that before the party began, Scarlet had actually showed up to talk to Alistair, but Godfrey wouldn't let her in. Instead, the Order chased her down, where she then hid in the woods, taking each of the cultists out one by one, staying up all night in the forest while insanity ensued on the inside, waiting for her to make her final move. But we don't actually play as the Chaos crew in this map. Instead, we are playing as a cast of celebrity characters. Gideon Jones, a cowboy played by Kiefer Sutherland, who was a performer in a stage show that Godfrey had once seen before. Christina Fowler, a con artist and psychic played by Helena Bonham Carter, who has ties to Nikola Tesla and Harry Houdini, both wealthy figures of the time who likely knew Alistair in some capacity. Jonathan Warwick, the Brigadier General played by Brian Blessed, a perhaps distant relative and friend of the Rhodes family, as he apparently has relatives buried inside of this map. And lastly, Godfrey, Alistair Rhodes' butler played by Charles Dance, a man who was loyal to Alistair Rhodes but was corrupted by the Order via Prima Materia. And while I personally always love a zombies map with a celebrity crew, Dead of the Night's particular character set is one of the weaker installments inside of Call of Duty history. Usually, the characters have a deep-seated reason to be inside of that particular map. Mob of the Dead was played by mobsters trying to escape a prison, Call of the Dead had actors on a zombified set, and Shadows of Evil, probably the best cast of them all, were cursed as they bore the mark due to evil deeds they performed in their past. But inside of Dead of the Night, the crew just seems to show up with loose ties to Alistair. It's perhaps plausible that these relationships were going to be explored further down the line via DLC, but whatever the case, through lackluster plot devices and clunky beginning moments of the intro cutscene, the presence of our celebrity cast feels unearned compared to previous zombies experiences. Fortunately, their personalities do begin to shine through as the player begins to interact with them, surviving not only the undead, but the map's main questline. The main quest inside of Dead of the Night is by far one of the more tricky quests to truly optimize and become an expert in, as there really is a ton of detail packed into the map that allows the player to streamline their experience, with the caveat that they are thinking 2 steps ahead at any given point. That being said, another element that fans were becoming more upset about was complexity in the game's gameplay mechanics and main Easter egg quests. But I want to put a huge asterisk on the word complexity, because I personally think that this wasn't the issue per se, but it was really due to a combination of factors, mainly being 1, all of the changes with BO4 zombies and the problems at launch, 2, zombies and Easter egg fatigue, and lastly, and I think most importantly, number 3, artificial difficulty. Obviously, there were a handful of issues on Blood of the Dead, Voyage of Despair, and 9 that were a little more tedious than they perhaps needed to be. And with the blue screens having these same experiences repeatedly through multiple maps, and the fact that players had been solving Easter eggs for 4 zombies games in a row, all of these elements created a compound effect that agitated the fanbase in a way that we had never seen before. And as you would expect, Dead of the Night was not impervious to any of this criticism, as shortly after the release, it received a ton of backlash for being overly complicated and not casual friendly. Now, just a second ago, I mentioned how artificial difficulty was one of BO4's biggest issues, but what exactly is artificial difficulty, and how does Dead of the Night suffer from this particular issue? Well, artificial difficulty, also referred to as fake difficulty, is a term which is used to describe cheap methods of creating difficulty used in games to increase the likelihood of failure. This is generally done with things like bullet sponge enemies, or maybe creating an escort mission with an obscene parameter to make the task appear more daunting than it really is. So people tend to claim that Dead of the Night was, and still is, merely a collectathon of random parts that there are no rhyme or reason for, other than to make things difficult to players or to slow down the fun factor. And while I can understand that argument, I think when you stop to think about it for a second, there is a bit more nuance here, as the structure of Dead of the Night is quite simple, but added is an illusion of complexity which gives the perception that things are much more grand than they really are. And this was precisely intended by the developers.
The journey while kind of going on the quest and the journey of playing the map as well. It's like some of our more complex maps really ask you to engage with the map in a certain way, in terms of how you're playing and activating a certain cerebral level. Interestingly enough, some of our simpler maps, which are about very simple kind of blocking and layout, appeal to people in a way that allows them to take in more items. The thing I love about Dead of the Night is the environment has a grandeur to it and also a simplicity to it, which allows you then to focus on the characters and the story that's being told. And that's very important.
The thing is, intentionality doesn't always matter if the result isn't received properly by the player. This then added more fuel to the Black Ops 4 hate train, which at the time seemed to be barreling straight towards the edge of a cliff. But when we take a look at the map from an objective standpoint, is it really that complex? Is this hate truly warranted? Well, no, I don't actually believe that it is. Getting set up on Dead of the Night requires the player to build a variety of tools in order to just both advance in the main quest and to simply have a good time. Things like the shield parts, silverware and chemicals for the silver bullets, Firegate energy cores for traps, the wonder weapon symbols, and of course, the process of opening up the Pack-a-Punch machine. The problem here is that when we combine all of these parts that we have to find together, it makes it seem like the player needs to memorize about 60 or so specific locations to be able to have a successful playthrough. But I promise you, learning this process is much simpler than it appears to be. Let me explain. If the player can actually shift their thinking a bit and start looking at the map in sections rather than memorizing locations, it makes gathering the parts a lot more fluid. The main sections of the map are the estate, the laboratory, and the graveyard. Then there are subsections of the estate, being the main hall and the cellar, the dining hall wing, and the library wing. And when you break down the map into these particular sections, you'll start to notice the pattern that one of those items you're looking for will always spawn in one of those sections. For example, with the shield, the parts will always spawn in the dining hall wing, the library wing, and in the main hall section upstairs. The same can be said about the Firegate energy cores, as one will be in the graveyard, estate, and laboratory areas. The chemicals will also be in those main 3 areas. The silver and shield parts will be in the subsections, and the wonder weapon symbols have a mix of both of these systems, with the exception of the yellow symbol being outside at the back of the house. And it's much easier to remember large patterns of gameplay mechanics and then memorize the exceptions to those rules, rather than try to cognitively cling onto roughly 62 individualized spawn points. There is no need to break your brain if you don't have to. Will it take some time to learn? Perhaps. I'm not discounting that. But the one thing that is true is that Dead of the Night is certainly not as convoluted as many claim it to be. And for those vocal group of fans who do believe that Dead of the Night's lengthy setup process is overly complicated, I actually would argue that this is a good exercise for the casual player base, because rather than the casual player having to deep dive into the depths of the COD Zombies ecosystem, they can have a somewhat complicated surface experience that is quite satisfying to complete. Once a casual player has opened up Pack-a-Punch, built the Wonder Weapon, acquired the silver bullets and shield, they have actually done quite a bit of work, and that process can be very rewarding as opposed to the hardcore player who wants not only that amazing setup gameplay loop, but the intense main quest on top of it. And what a great quest it truly is. When the player first spawns into the map, it may appear a bit overwhelming as you look at the sheer density of the map's aesthetic. Not only are there tight quarters, but there is also so much detail all around you. It's kind of intimidating as most people just don't know where to start. However, there are a few things that you will notice, like a giant statue in the middle of the main hall, wall weapons and windows, and of course, the voices of the characters speaking. If you are lucky, you will have spawned in with Godfrey, who will have a conversation with himself most of the time, as the dark version of Godfrey is locked inside of his own mind, keeping information from the other crew members as he has a secret agenda given to him by the Order. But I digress. As the player begins killing zombies and opening doors, things begin to feel a bit more familiar, especially when you make it to the entrance hall of the map to interact with the Sentinel artifact to truly begin the trial. Prima Materia flies out of the Sentinel artifact and is so powerful that it makes the house shake at its core. Glass cracks while the estate buckles under the pressure of the magic material, locking our characters inside of the situation that they haven't the slightest clue of how to escape. But as we continue to take in our surroundings, players will notice a gentle glow hovering from 3 vases found inside of Rhodes Manor. These vases can be broken, and inside are 3 crystals that are to be filled up with 4 zombie souls each. Once full, the player can interact with them and will receive a vision of a specific item inside of the map. These items are usually a grandfather clock, a perk statue, a painting of a woman, and once the player finds these items around the estate, a challenge associated with them will need to be completed to acquire a tuning fork, which will help to remove the Prima Materia blocking a gate on the outside of the property. The Grandfather Clock challenge requires the player to stand in a circle in front of the clock while special zombies spawn in and try to take us down. After the clock ticks down from 12, the clock will then open, handing the player one of the 3 tuning forks. The perk statue will either be on the laboratory side or the graveyard side of the mansion, and once the player enters that space, the map will section off itself with a cool blue glow, and then vampires or Nosferatus will begin to spawn in, which is our first introduction to this new enemy type. And just like the Grandfather Clock challenge, after enough Nosferatus are killed, another tuning fork is added to our inventory. Lastly, there is the painting. Now, there are a handful of locations around the map to keep an eye out for, but once they are found, they can be interacted with, and a ghost named Catherine will come out of said object. It can also be like a doll or a document, but I'm not going to get into the weeds with that one. But she will lead players around the map to one of many locations where she will finesse out a final tuning fork so that we can finally make our way to the back of the mansion. At this point in our quest for greatness, we are able to open up the Pack-a-Punch area, but it's generally best to wait just a moment while taking some time to gather and craft the other buildable items on the map, such as the shield, silver bullets, and of course the map's wonder weapon. Once we are all set up, we can make our way back to the gate and use the tuning forks to disintegrate the Prima Materia to finally enter the forest. And as soon as the gate opens, a werewolf will jump across the forest from tree to tree, howling and waiting for his moment to skin us alive. However, since we are fully stacked to the brim with everything OP in the map, we can take this sucker down and explore one of the most beautiful Pack-a-Punch locations to date. But now that we have the map opened up, it's time to dive into each of the main quest lines. Trial by Ordeal is the name of this main quest, and it's broken down into 3 sub-quest lines. There is the Telescope quest line, the Effigy Questline, and then the Knights questline. But before we can complete the final 2 quest lines, we must do the Telescope questline first by lining the telescope up properly. But in order to do that, we need to activate the quest lines by interacting with those same 3 seer crystals we used to open up Pack-a-Punch, as we will then be given new visions which represent and correlate to these new Easter egg quest lines. To begin the telescope step, we must make our way over to the cemetery and shoot the top of the mausoleum with our weapon. Then the top of the mausoleum will retract and fire out a beam of energy across the map, which will end up becoming halted by a blue crystal propped up by the statue of Atlas. And And as you'll notice at the top of the statue, there are these circular beams with mirror plates attached to them that need to be rotated in order to reflect the beam back into the crystal so that it can destroy itself and the head of the statue, which will then allow the beam to pass through the estate over to the top of the laboratory to connect both buildings across the map. If we make our way to the top of the North Atrium Bridge, 3 wheels will open up, giving the player access to turning these mirrored plates around. Now all we have to do is just match them to the correct colors. I believe there are a few different ways to solve this puzzle, but the easiest way to do it is turning switch 1 to blue, switch 3 to green, and then switch 2 to red, and then repeating this process until the destruction animation begins to play. Now we can make it over to the other side of the estate and see the greenhouse laboratory receiving the energy coming out of the dining hall wing side roof. This now means the greenhouse laboratory has an exuberant amount of power, but there are a few other steps that we need to complete in order to activate the telescope. And for those of you who really know this map and its history, you already know that this next quest step is what really pushed fans over the edge in December of 2018. And if you don't know, well, you're about to find out. Just a few moments ago, we talked about how the community felt that Dead of the Night has the player collect a bunch of parts and then memorize 60 plus locations for every item inside of the map. And there is a bit more nuance there when it comes to the specifications of getting set up in a zombies map. Some people like a little challenge and others don't, and that can be boiled down to preference. But this next step, I don't really think it can be defended, as it is just objectively bad game design. Around the entirety of the estate are 3 hidden symbols that are needed so that we can input them into the telescope's wheel mount rotation mechanism to unlock the observatory, allowing us to make our final adjustments. But there is just one problem. These symbols are really tough to see, are hidden in super obscure locations, and they are paired with scratch marks that are also hidden alongside them, and then the player has to tally up all of the scratch marks in each specific room with that correlated symbol, add them up, and then input them in the telescope in order from least to greatest. I believe the symbols can be hidden in around 6 to 7 different locations, and there will be up to 3 sets of scratch marks, which means the player needs to be able to memorize around 30 specific locations for these symbols. It is a really tedious step, and if you aren't seasoned or familiar with Dead of the Night at all, it can really halt your experience. And I mean that in the most literal sense. The gameplay can come to a screeching stop. And again, not to sound like a broken record, but when you combine all of these pieces together of solving tough Easter eggs for years since Black Ops 3 Zombies, the multitude of changes inside of BO4 Zombies gameplay, all the launch issues, the focus on the Chaos storyline, and now fans feel like they need a Britannica encyclopedia in order to complete Dead of the Night, it's no wonder people were upset. But we're not going to let a couple of tough puzzles stop us from having fun, right? Right?
There's skeptics in my chat. It's like a giant Dead of the Night fan, and he's like, this part does suck.
Yeah, this is not my favorite either.
I'm sure the comments will be completely civil about this. Anyhow, after we find all of our symbols, we can input them into the telescope and then knife the mechanism to finalize the process. The observatory will begin to start functioning and lining itself up so that we can head over to the final area where this wheel is, turn it so that the telescope protrudes from the rooftop, and then we can melee the wheel with our shield so that it holds itself into place. But we are not done yet. Oh no, we have to drop down and turn on the electricity trap just beneath the telescope, run through it with our shield out in front of us, make our way back up to the telescope and melee it with our electrically charged shield, thus completing the step in its entirety. And if we again drop down and make our way back towards the underside of the telescope staircase, you will notice a latch open up on the side of Alistair's machine, which reveals a large stone slab with what appears to be a specific Celtic symbol. At this point, the player can interact with the symbol by holding down the interact key for about 5 seconds, and then will be forced into a lockdown with tons of zombies and Nosferatu spawning in all around the greenhouse laboratory, making for quite an intense holdout. This moment is capped off by a few werewolves spawning in, and after they are killed, we will be rewarded with a max ammo and are able to continue on our journey. Taking a look at one of the other psychic crystals will reveal to us an effigy of sorts that appears to be made out of some sticks. And if we make our way outside to the graveyard, the player will notice that leaves begin to drop down from 5 specific trees very rapidly, and if these trees are shot with the wonder weapon, a branch will drop that is able to be picked up and sent over to a specific area inside of the graveyard. After this step is complete, the player needs to make their way around the graveyard and look for a tombstone with one of the playable characters on it that has the date 1912. This is ironically the year that Alistair Rhodes' party is currently happening, meaning that the character is already dead. This allows the player to apply some sort of spiritual essence onto their person, and once completed, can shoot a fully upgraded wonder weapon at the effigy, strap themselves to it, and sacrifice themselves to the pits of hell. Shortly after this sacrifice, the player turns into a ghost and goes around the map looking again for Catherine, that spirit that helped us find the tuning fork for Pack-a-Punch earlier in our missions. Catherine will lead us back to the graveyard and reveal another stone slab with a Celtic symbol written upon it, just as the previous questline, and this process ends with another lockdown in Werewolf mini boss battle. But there is one last step for us to complete, and that is the Knights questline. In order to collect the final stone slab, we need to take the fire gate energy cores located around the map and place them inside of 3 fire traps. Afterwards, the player needs to activate the traps, shoot the fire with Alistair's Annihilator, pull out their shield, and then melee certain fireplaces in a specific order. If the sequence is completed correctly, gems will spawn inside of the bed of ashes at the final fireplace, which we will then need to pick up and place inside of 3 sets of Knights armor located around the graveyard, the garden, and inside of the estate itself. Once all 3 gems are placed, the armor will break down and a spiritual essence encapsulating the gems will begin floating and following the player around. We then need to lead these gems to the forest out back and place the correct color gem on the correlating symbol on the ground. After the gems are placed, a set of spiritual armor will spawn and needs zombie souls in order to move each set of armor down to the very front of the forest near the Pack-a-Punch machine. Once enough souls are collected, the sets of armor will finally connect with a bit of energy holding them together, but we need to sacrifice a werewolf in the center of this triangle in order to reveal our final stone slab. And sure enough, one spawns for us. And after the sacrifice, we then can interact with the slab, and as it begins to float in the air, the final lockdown takes place. This time with elemental zombies and of course, a few werewolves to cap things off. However, once this process is complete, we are boss fight ready and just need to make our way to the sealed off area where all of the Celtic symbols have placed themselves as keys to unlocking a secret chamber. Treyarch isn't exactly known for making the most complicated boss fights in COD Zombies history, and even though they have a couple that are on the more difficult side, it seems that most of them are a bit more simplistic when it comes to the gameplay mechanics, and Dead of the Night's boss battle doesn't seem to break this pattern in any meaningful way. The fight takes place against the Shadow Werewolf, who has the ability to turn invisible and charge at the player around the map. The secret to catching him is to turn these statues or dials around that are shining a green light, and as the player spins them, they will lock onto a specific platform on the map, and we have to capture the boss inside of the square where we can then lay bullets into him. Honestly, the trickiest part of this boss fight isn't really the Shadow Werewolf, but more so the zombies and Crimson Nosferatus around the map that have the ability to leap across, latching onto the player, taking about half their health away while they are also obstructing their view. This fight does have a few phases to it where in between battling the Shadow Werewolf there will be some space to breathe and just fight zombies and mini bosses. Overall, there aren't too many moments of high stress or intensity when it comes to the fight itself, and with plenty of space to train and power-ups to replenish your shield ammo, the anxiety-pumping feeling just isn't there like with the Nikolai fight in Gorod Krovi or Odin's Eye inside of Voyage of Despair. And while the fight isn't bad or anything like that, it's just mostly unremarkable, which is a bit of a disappointing gameplay climax for an otherwise exciting main quest. That being said, after the Shadow Werewolf is locked down for the final time and killed, he will collapse, leaving nothing on the map but the full moon lighting up the night sky and the final cutscene beginning to play.
I've seen some strange things in my time, but this takes the cake.
Good thing you're better at shooting than fortune telling. Now where's the bar? I worked up a powerful thirst.
Wait! Did you see that?
What now? What the hell does this mean?
It means you are not worthy.
Immediately, we see that our 3 main celebrity characters are completely confused by what just happened, and as they are winding down from their triumphant victory, they noticed an apparition of the Odin Sentinel artifact and are curious to what it is. Godfrey becomes enraged as he is under a trance from the Order at this point and grabs a sword off of the wall and slaughters the entire crew while claiming that they are not worthy. Through all of the commotion, a candle gets knocked over, which sets the entire home aflame. But then there is a twist. Scarlet, who had been out in the woods all night, comes into the house and shoots Godfrey with a pistol that was hidden in one of her father's dresser drawers. Begging for her father's location, Godfrey won't budge as his final words are,
"You cannot stop what is to come."
Scarlet races outside to see the Order taking her father, and she chases them down with her car, shooting them with the overpowered Welling. She unfortunately crashes her car into a tree and looks up into the sky, realizing it's too late as a plane with her father held captive aboard flies above her head. She begins to read a letter Alistair wrote to her in case of an emergency, which sends her on an adventure to save her father with the only other men he believes he can trust: Bruno Delacroix, Diego Nacali, and of course, Stanton Shaw. The main quest for Dead of the Night brings about a lot of complicated feelings from the community as it showcases the duality of Treyarch's game design. With a more complicated setup and a derailing mid-game puzzle to solve, I think it would be disingenuous to ignore why people were frustrated with this map. That being said, I do think the animosity is largely overblown, especially when you take this map's particular environment being in a murder mystery mansion whodunit setting. It makes some of these more complicated feature sets feel deliberate and curated to fit the aesthetic of the map. Hidden walls, compartments, chambers, and strange puzzles are par for the course when it comes to this genre, but does that necessarily mean it leads to great gameplay design? Well, yes, I think that's exactly what it means. Dead of the Night is simply jam-packed with secrets, stuff to unlock, and interesting side quests to engage with. And there really aren't a ton of maps in the Zombies lexicon that can rival it in terms of sheer content. The silver bullets, shield, and fire traps are really just scratching the surface in terms of items you are able to craft and build overall. The steak knife is one of the most OP weapons inside of Dead of the Night, aside from the Wonder Weapon, which we will talk about in just a moment. But this melee weapon not only has a fun quest, but it is super useful in taking out those damn nosy fart 2s.
What'd the Brigadier call you? Nosy fart 2?
After crafting the silver bullets and purchasing the Bowie knife, the player can head to the forest and look through these specific trees to notice the same elemental symbols we saw inside of Voyage of Despair carved into the tree trunks. We can then make our way over to the gardens area of the map and shoot the corresponding symbols which are engraved on these small little stone slabs. After the player completes this, they can head back to the forest and melee those same symbols located on a larger tree trunk next to where we found the symbols initially. And then we can melee the tree trunk with our shield so that we can knock down a branch that we will use to carve into our steak knife. But before we can craft it, we need to collect some Nosferatu souls in the graveyard by placing the branch down on this shrine in front of the mausoleum. This does take a good amount of vampire souls, but if you are big-brained and think ahead, you can actually force spawn in a bunch of Nosferatus to kill by utilizing the Crimson Nosferatu spawn, which you will need to build the Wonder Weapon anyway. After this process is complete, you can head over to this crafting table in the graveyard and build the steak knife, which is a one-hit melee to any Nosferatu. Super powerful and useful as those little bastards can get annoying, especially the longer that you survive inside of this mansion. But that isn't the only secret weapon inside of Dead of the Night, as we also have the Savage Impaler. This is pretty much a reskin of the NX Shadowclaw from Black Ops 3, but it honestly fits pretty well inside of this map due to the nature of hunting vampires with a crossbow. And in order to acquire this mini wonder weapon, the player will need to blow out 6 candles around the map and then interact with a gravestone inside of the forest, which puts you in a zombie blood type of vision. I think that this step is a play on the phrase "you can't get blood out of a stone" because Treyarch likes to do funny things like that in their games, but I could honestly just be reading way too much into it. What's more likely to be true is that this is where Catherine the Ghost, who helps us unlock Pack-a-Punch, is buried, because after we interact with the stone, we need to find her so she can lead us to the mausoleum to complete the next set of steps. And you may be asking yourself, why is Catherine possibly buried here? Or why is the ghost helping us? And those are great questions to ask, and there's actually an entire subplot to this friendly ghost giving us a hand, or maybe I should say not so friendly ghost. Catherine was actually a serial killer who murdered multiple people via poison. She even hid some of her poison in a ragdoll that we use as one of the locations to spawn her when we are collecting the tuning forks for Pack-a-Punch. She was ultimately found guilty and hanged at Newgate Prison, and her spirit came back to haunt the mansion. And if the player looks inside the crystals enough, they can actually see a glimpse of her broken and tattered body via a jump scare. Stuff like this is why Zombies is just so damn cool. Anyways, after we're covered in blood, we need to locate Catherine inside of the mansion, where she will lead us back to the mausoleum. At this point, her ghost will inhabit zombies, which we need to kill in a specific manner and in a specific order so that the zombies will drop small pieces of jewelry. These pieces are then to be collected and placed inside of the mausoleum, where we then can kill a good amount of Nosferatus. Once we've completed the task, we can head over to this gravesite and interact with it so that we can reveal a secret chamber. The player will then head down to find the Savage Impaler sitting on a pillar waiting, and once acquired, a lockdown will take place with Nosferatus filling the chamber. The Savage Impaler is also a one-shot kill to Nosferatus, similar to the steak knife, and it's largely pretty dang fun to use. However, this weapon can't be pack-a-punched and is okay okay for killing zombies, but it sucks for taking down the final boss. Trust me, I tried. It takes forever. And again, that isn't all. There are a handful of small Easter eggs for the player to stumble into that further build upon the Haunted Mansion aesthetic that Treyarch was going for. The pool table, wine cellar, and bookshelf Easter eggs are great side additions where by just performing a simple task of shooting pool balls, knifing wine barrels, or interacting with books, a secret space will open with a small reward of power-ups, pack-a-punch weapons, or even silver bullets. These are the types of quality of life features that give a map depth and variety, helping to make COD Zombies the special mode that it is. But where Dead of the Night really shines is with its wonder weapon, Alistair's Folly. Now before, when we were discussing Dead of the Night's artificial difficulty, we briefly went over the 4 symbols that need to be found, which can then be input into this mechanism to unlock the base wonder weapon. And while this does require a little memorization, it really is a pretty simple process to be able to obtain Alistair's Folly, and ultimately, that's a good thing, and Treyarch made the right call by having this quest be simple. Alistair's Folly is a pretty easy to use wonder weapon and acts like the Chaos storyline's ray gun where it shoots a simple blast firing individual rounds. But these effects are just the beginning. The upgrading process is fairly straightforward as well, and again, plays into a ton of the mechanics baked into the game's stylized whodunit murder mystery setting. There are in fact 3 levels to this wonder weapon, and the first, as I already stated, is Alistair's Folly. The second level is called Chaos Theory, and the final level is titled Alistair's Annihilator. In order to craft the Chaos Theory variant, the player needs to bash their shield on a bookcase inside of the library, which holds upgraded pieces for the weapon. Then the player needs to kill a werewolf with silver bullets so that the werewolf will drop a piece of prima materia. We could then head over to the laboratory and insert the prima materia into this large machine underneath the telescope, distill it to a more concentrated form, and then craft it together to form the Chaos Theory. The basic effects on the Chaos Theory are a tornado effect that sweeps enemies off their feet and twirls them around in the air, and the other effect is similar to the Brain Rot alternate ammo type from the Pack-a-Punch machine, but has a greater area of effect and likely longer duration. And while going from the Folly to Chaos Theory is a pretty significant buff, upgrading to Alistair's Annihilator is where the real magic happens. This process requires that we kill 3 Nosferatus with the Tornado Charge Shot and collect the bile that drops from them. Then the player can take that bile over to the graveyard and smear it upon a specific stone casket, which will reveal another boss enemy, the Crimson Nosferatu. And once he is killed, he will also drop prima materia that we need to collect. The next step requires us to head towards the mausoleum and look for a orange glowing light and shoot it 4 times with the wonder weapon to reveal a bat. And just like the Crimson Nosferatu, once it is shot from the sky, you can pick up the prima materia that falls from its dead body. But before we can craft the Annihilator, we need one more upgraded part, which Alistair accidentally lost in the forest before all of this madness took place. In order to retrieve the missing weapon pieces, we simply need to shoot the Brain Rot-like charge shot at a zombie's torso while they are heading toward or near one of the 3 dig sites. And by doing so, the zombies will begin to perform a digging animation that will reveal the final pieces which we need to craft. And once everything is in our inventory, we can make our way to the laboratory again, placing both pieces of the collected prima materia inside of that large machine, taking the concentrated form to the final crafting table, and building the Folly's final form, Alistair's Annihilator. This thing is a goddamn beast. It has more damage output with its single shots and a total of 4 charge shot effects, 2 of them being the Tornado and Brain Rot effects that we have seen with the other variants, but then there is also a shrinking charge shot, which obviously shrinks the enemies down to God only knows where, and then there is a flaming ball charge effect, which burns and disintegrates the zombies. The only downside to this weapon is that you can't control which effect releases when you shoot a charged shot, and it does appear to cycle through them somewhat randomly, but they are all super powerful and great for camping, training, or any other style of gameplay that the player wants to pursue. So how does the overarching gameplay feel inside of Dead of the Night compared to the 8 total maps we have to choose from inside of Black Ops 4 Zombies? Well, it suffers from some of the similar fates that a lot of the other maps do inside of Black Ops 4, but surprisingly, the gameplay loop has some standout bits that make surviving the undead feel slightly different as opposed to some of the other game's offerings. The fact that Rhodes Manor is packed to the brim with secrets and interesting things to do makes the replayability of Dead of the Night off the charts. I would say it has just as much replayability as Blood of the Dead, and maybe even more depending on your mood. This is simply due to the fact that each time the player runs through Dead of the Night, they can choose various levels of depth in which to explore. From doing the billiards Easter egg, upgrading the steak knife, or completing the whole main quest, there really is a plethora of activities to choose from that can scratch any itch for any Zombies fan. But similar to the other maps in this particular COD title, there is a bit of mundaneness that creeps in largely due to the out-of-map gameplay mechanics, which end up keeping every map on an even playing field. Since the elements of individuality had largely been removed from the maps and placed into the menus, this impacted the unique gameplay approach that a lot of previous maps had from Black Ops 3 and prior. Maps like Shangri-La, Moon, Mob of the Dead, Drak, and the list goes on and on, all had special mechanics inside of them that were unique to only them. Within BO4, we had the same specialists, perks, guns, and equipment in every map, which allowed for fun updates when something new was added to the game, but left the longevity of the game in the dust when it came to thinking of that one amazing reason to load up a Zombies map. Luckily, when it came to Dead of the Night, as I've already mentioned, there is so much content in terms of the side quests, weapon upgrades, and narrative Easter eggs, you really are getting the best of both worlds here in terms of modern Zombies gameplay mechanics with that classic unique feel of the Zelensky early Blundell era. Another thing that made Dead of the Night special was its interesting map layout. I know I might get a lot of flack for this, but this map's layout reminds me of a mix between Gorod Krovi and Shangri-La, but with that whodunit Celtic coat of paint. So what do I mean by that? Well, Gorod Krovi's layout is a classic layout inspired from Derice inside of World at War that has a center hub with an A, B, and C wing sticking out from the center. And I think most of you would agree with me there, at least I hope so. But Dead of the Night is extremely close quarters, similar to Shangri-La, and also like Shang, there really isn't any great place to train zombies, but you can utilize the entire map as a training ground and loop throughout the entire thing, killing zombies as you go. But this does take time, especially if you're trying to go for those higher rounds, which is why camping ends up being your best friend inside of this map, as the player can camp almost anywhere, getting to decently high rounds casually. High rounds on this map are actually pretty fun, as you could really set base up anywhere, and if you find the Firegate energy cores, then you can customize your experience to have a trap ready to go as a backup. The player also has the silver bullets craftable that really comes in handy, as not only does it give you infinite ammo for all bullet weapons inside of the map, but it has a higher damage output, which is simply a great quality of life feature and makes Dead of the Night that much more unique. At the end of the day, this map hits some of the same negative notes as some of the other maps inside of BO4, where the Helion Salvo becomes the best wonder weapon for getting to those higher rounds, but since Alistair's Annihilator is so OP, it does and can hold its own for quite some time, especially when you have the fire traps cooking up zombies before they get too close to you. But the great gameplay features don't stop there, as Treyarch created one of the most difficult and, dare I say, fun gauntlets inside of Dead of the Night. The Super Blood Wolf Moon Gauntlet rivals some of the more challenging gauntlets that Black Ops 4 Zombies has to offer, but it balances things in quite a different way, which lends itself to please more of the quest-centric player, as opposed to applying just the crude or obscure challenges method only. Now, it's true that the Voyage of Despair gauntlets are much more difficult in a masochistic type of way, where the challenges are largely tedious and grandiose simultaneously, but the Super Blood Wolf Moon Gauntlet is difficult in a completely different style by making players prepare for certain Easter egg steps ahead of time, but also locking them away from being able to be completed preemptively by focusing players on strange tasks or literally pushing them away from specific areas in order to complete objectives in other sections of the mansion. And at any given point in this gauntlet, the player needs to be thinking 4, 5, maybe even 6 steps ahead so that they don't get tripped up by something super trivial. But this gameplay loop leads to such a rewarding feeling when completed, a sense of pride that no other gauntlet has made me feel thus far. Definitely an A+ gauntlet from where I'm sitting. In similar fashion to all of the other maps, Zombies Rush is still not resonating with me, and it certainly doesn't work on Dead of the Night. This is not only due to the constrictive map layout, but also due to the Nosferatu's aggressive leaping towards the player. It's just not a fun experience. And I received a few comments on one of the other videos which made some decent points about how Rush is a great mode with friends, as it's a very competitive game mode which isn't designed to be played alone. And I gave these ideas some serious consideration, but sadly I have arrived at the same conclusion. Rush is ultimately a bad mode. Even in a co-op match, Rush is still designed for each player singularly, meaning you are not playing for your team, but you're playing for yourself. Therefore, the core gameplay loop wouldn't be any different with 1 player versus 4 players, except for the number of zombies in the map itself. So I still believe I can judge this fairly and accurately. I also try to not use the fun with friends as a metric for objectively measuring whether or not something is a good experience, since there are many instances in life that are just downright awful beautiful, from games to music to movies, and despite the experience being terrible, there is still a sense of joy simply because you were with the right set of people. That being said, competitive games are great, and I love getting into it with friends from time to time, but the fact is there are plenty of better games out there that can satisfy and are designed from the ground up with competitive play in mind, and are not just an extra mode created to pad out the overall content offering. We've talked about a lot inside of this retrospective, from the player base's reception before and after launch, the developer's state of mind, the gameplay, the main quest, and much, much more. And I think it's fair to say that this map highlights a very complicated and contemptuous time in the COD zombie zeitgeist, and that when looking back in the past, it shows just how unfortunate the Black Ops 4 Zombies development cycle really was. Treyarch just kept falling flat on their face over and over again, and while that was certainly unfair for them, and I do have empathy for what the developers were experiencing at the time, I do think that it's very important to remember that this is a product made for customers who spend their time and hard-earned dollar on this franchise. It's very important for companies to remember why they are creating the things that they are creating and to find the balance between building what they are passionate about, delivering what fans want, and somehow exceeding those expectations all at the same time. The fact that game development can happen at all is miraculous, and I don't envy what the developers are up against, but there is a reality that they need to accept when it comes to fan expectations, and this is unfortunately where Dead of the Night missteps the hardest. Treyarch had spent a decade building something magical with the Ether storyline, and pulling the rug from underneath the community by making the Operation Absolute Zero DLC a chaos map was completely tone deaf. Between all of the gameplay changes, blue screen instability, and deviating from the Ether storyline, it's no wonder fans rejected Dead of the Night the way that they did, as a dagger had been pushed so deep into the back of the community that not only did Dead of the Night kill Black Ops 4 Zombies overnight, but all of the trust and goodwill Treyarch had built vanished in a second. This effect was so devastating that it has left a lingering cloud of distrust that has plagued the release of every title that has come after it. And while I have never hated the Chaos storyline or Black Ops 4 in general, I was still baffled by what was going on. Still to this day, it boggles my mind at how many missteps were taken and how they seemingly could have all been avoided, or at least been transparent. Or maybe they couldn't. Some things we'll just never know. But there was one thing that was crystal clear from Treyarch's 2018 mission, and that was to bring fans an epic adventure of Call of Duty Zombies that we would never forget. And I can safely say that this is an experience I will remember fondly for the rest of my life. The narrative, map design, main quest, side content, gameplay loop, wonder weapon, and enemies, it's AAA gaming at its finest. It's aged gracefully, and it still holds up all of these years later. And while Treyarch was wrong for leading the mode with Chaos at the helm, Dead of the Night as a map was and is a complete success and does not deserve to be perceived as a stain, but as one of the most iconic experiences inside of the Call of Duty Zombies legacy.
People who like this map are literally lying to themselves to seem cool, because this map is ass.
This map.
This map is so bad.